Good afternoon, everyone. From myself, Marion Prendergast, and the Committee of the Northwest District Society, you're welcome to our first of three sessions, Tips and Tricks for Excel and Power BI. The sessions are an introductory session, but for advanced learning and CPD credits, you can avail of a number of courses being hosted by Chartered Accountants Ireland, and these can be viewed through the Institute's website. For those of you logging on today, this session is recorded, so you will have the ability to have a playback function. The sessions today, as delivered by Niamh Loftus, will be kept to under 1 hour. If your questions could be uploaded through the chat function, and these will be answered as we progress through the session. If time does not permit, the questions will be followed up by Niamh post the session through email links. Niamh has significant experience in training and Excel training needs and set up our own training company, Smart Skills, in 2008, offering a wide range of hands-on and instructor-led training courses. I hope you find this session and the follow-up session engaging and informative. Feedback will be most welcome if there is anything that you would like addressed in the follow-up sessions, and these can be directed through our regional coordinator, arlene.gibbs@charteredaccountants.ie. Again, just to remind you, our next two sessions will be dealing with Power Query and Power BI. So for today, if I kick over to Niamh, I hope you find the session as informative and as exciting as I have found in my introductory talks with Niamh as a precursor to the launch of these sessions. Thank you, Niamh. I'll pass over to you.
That's great. Thank you, Marion. And hi, everybody. You're very welcome to your lunch and learn today. So yeah, I'll be with you for about an hour. So we're just gone 12:02. So we've 58 minutes to count down to a finished dashboard, hopefully. So yeah, it's a really interesting topic. This, I suppose, it's a feature. Excel dashboards are a feature which, if you can master them, can really give you really good insights into your data. And data, we have a lot of it. We all have a lot of data at our disposal. It's just trying to get meaning and answers out of that data as quickly as we can. And that's what I'm hoping these kind of skills I'm going to show you today will give you the knowledge and power to do so. So it's going to be very much a kind of a demonstration session. So I'm not going to be talking about things quite a lot. I'm going to be doing and showing you the techniques and the skills involved. There's quite a lot of steps, I guess, in what I'm going to show you, but there's nothing difficult about what I'm going to show you. I suppose that's the key point. Some of you, I'm sure, would be familiar with pivot tables. They are going to drive the dashboard that we're about to create. So if you have pivot table knowledge, that would be greatly helpful. If you're fairly new to pivot tables, even so, it's still not a hurdle, because pivot tables in themselves are quite easy to get your head around. And I say, if you're not really au fait with them or haven't done much with them before, even today's session will hopefully give you some insights into them. More so, the session though is getting that dashboard done. But as I say, it is pivot table driven, so that's why pivot tables are a core part of the session today. As Marion has mentioned, questions are welcome. I will keep an eye on the question box. Some questions I might just see and say, right, I'm going to need a little bit of time to answer that, so we'll be as well answer it post course or post session. But anything I see that's quick and easy to answer, I'll do it in the session as best I can. So I suppose, just to begin, what is a dashboard? A dashboard is a compact visual representation of a larger data set. And as I said, we have so much data at our disposal. And a big hurdle I find, and on training courses I get asked it all the time, is I need to get answers out of the data quickly. What can I do? How can I do that quickly? So a dashboard is a really good technique to do that. So if you have a data set that you frequently want to get those answers out of, building even just a simple set of visuals out of it can be greatly beneficial to you. So there's a couple of slides we'll look at first. This is just identifying what we're going to cover during the session, and then I'm going to jump over to Excel then and start to go through the process of setting up our dashboard. But before any dashboard is attempted, we have to know what we want to do. We have to know what the purpose of our dashboard is. So I suppose the steps involved really is what I've laid out here on this slide. And by the way, this presentation will be provided to you along with a little supporting Word document, which has a bit more detailed information about what I'm going to show you today as well. Yeah, this would largely be, I suppose, the layout or the set of steps that you might take when setting up a dashboard. First of all, establishing your requirements. And there's a few questions you can ask yourself sometimes, which will help you define what your requirements are. So what's the purpose of the dashboard? Who is your audience? Is it just yourself? Are you designing it for other people to digest? What data will you be using? And what kind of information, what kind of trends are you looking to track, or what kind of highlights are you looking for out of that data? Once you've identified your requirements, you can then start to look at your source data and prepare it for your dashboard journey. Let's look at one. I suppose the best way to understand what this is all about is to take a look at maybe a finished dashboard, and then maybe work our way back to maybe the raw data that feeds it. So this is an example of what you can do in Excel in terms of a dashboard. And obviously there are many techniques and there's many ways of approaching this. So my approach today will be to do something like this using pivot tables. So essentially what I would have started with, this is the finished product, what I would have started with in this particular example would have been a simple table of data. So the dashboard that we've just looked at a second ago is derived solely from this table of data. And obviously this dashboard is then highlighting key areas and key metrics and charts and visuals out of that data that I'm interested in tracking. I might just point out the different parts of it to you at this point. So obviously the main is made up of a few charts. So we've got, actually, let me just explain the data first. The data is course related data. So I've tried to keep it quite generic and simple, so it's just easy for us all to follow this. So each row of data, if you like, relates to a course that was held. And information about those courses are things like the date the course happened, who was the customer, what was the course we did, who was the tutor, how many people attended it, what was the cost to us, and what fees did we pull in from that course. So a lot of data and a lot of stuff we might want to know about that, a lot of little angles we might want to look at this data through and lenses we might look at it through. And that's what this dashboard is giving us the ability to do. We can straight away see how many courses we ran, what our total revenue was, what our costs were. For those 111 courses, we can see where they happened. So we've got a little chart there showing them by location. We've got a nice chart there showing our revenue over time. So these courses happened over the time frame of 2018 and 2019. So that little line chart there, a nice guide on how our income level was over that time period. And then a couple of additional charts showing how many certified and uncertified courses we ran and our top 5 customers by revenue. So again, these might be highlights, key attributes of that data that I want to track and easily see. And as you can see, when you have a dashboard like this, it's so easy to see those things straight away. In addition to those charts, and these essentially are just text boxes, by the way, that we have here. So there's nothing terribly fancy about them. But when you put them all together, they do look quite impressive. But in addition to those visuals, we also have some what are called slicers at the top of the dashboard. So these are going to enable me to hone in on certain aspects of that data. So for example, if I want to look at those numbers and figures in relation to a certain course that we ran. So if I want to see those stats for Excel, for example, I click on my Excel slicer button. Now the visuals are all trained to that course. I can unhighlight or unselect the slicer again to bring all the data back to me. But this is the idea. We can go in there and we can hone in on the certain parts of the data that interest us. And it's all at our fingertips. Rather than wading through the data as it is in the raw format, dashboards can give us this really good visibility over the data that we have. So I'm just keeping an eye on the questions here, just in case anything crops through. So I suppose that's just giving you an insight into what a dashboard is and what it can give you in terms of return for your time spent creating it. You may well get tenfold time back that you spent creating it, as opposed to the time you just spend rooting through that raw data to figure out these answers. Now, do you need a very sophisticated dashboard for every data set you use? Not at all. But for certain data that you use, I'm sure there's some of those data sets that something like this could be really beneficial to create. Now, next week's session, Power Query, will focus in on the data that you have. So if you're thinking, yeah, I'd love to be able to do this, but my data's not in great shape, maybe I have to spend a lot of time, or you feel like you're going to have to spend a lot of time working on the data to get it into a good structure for a dashboard, Power Query can be really helpful for that. And that's what we're going to cover in next week's session. So yeah, if your concern maybe is around your data that it's not going to be suitable for a dashboard, Power Query next week's session could be a really good session to look at for that kind of topic. Right, so now that we know a little bit about what the dashboard is, and I suppose the reason we might create one, just to give you a little bit more insight into how this one was done. Obviously, I'd say the starting point for any dashboard is your raw data. That's what I have here. This data is pretty well structured. It's in an Excel table, and each column represents one piece of data. So in, for example, column C, I have the customer name, D, I have the type, F, I have the name. So you can see it's one column per piece of data. And that's really important for a dashboard. We have clearly labeled columns that we can use to create our finished dashboard. But how did we get there? Like, so we've got all these lovely visuals and everything, but how did they happen? Well, they happened through the use of pivot tables. So you'll see I have a sheet in the middle here called pivot tables. And if we just take a look at this for a moment, what we have here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pivot tables on this worksheet. Each of these pivot tables connects or is the parent of a visual on the dashboard. So to give you an idea of, if we look at this visual here for number of courses by location, this is our Galway, Sligo, and so on, and our course numbers for each of those locations. That visual there was born out of this pivot table here. In a similar way, we have another pivot down here showing top 5 customers. So this is my revenue and the top 5 customers. And that is shown in our dashboard in this visual. Certified versus uncertified training, you can see is from this one. So how many certified and uncertified courses did we run? And then our line chart showing our revenue over time is from this pivot table here, which is showing my years and quarters, and again, the revenue generated in those timeframes. So I was able to create the pivot tables, and I was also able to then create charts out of those pivot tables. And essentially that's all we're doing. We're using the pivots to get the summaries that we need. And then from those pivot tables, we can derive charts. We can also derive the slicers, which I've talked about, these nice options at the top. Olin, yeah, I see your question there. Interested in the refresh option and linking to the database in a manner, yeah, that it works. Absolutely. So Olin, yeah, your query there regarding the refresh. Yeah, I'll try and squeeze that little button in at the end there to show you what that does. So yeah, the refresh basically is if the data changes in this sheet here, the refresh button refreshes everything, refreshes the pivots, refreshes all the visuals, and our data is up to date. So I will come to that. And I also see in your question there, Olin, about linking to the data. Yeah, that's, I think, where your Power Query feature will be very helpful, but I'm afraid that's next week. So we have to leave that part of your question till then. But yeah, definitely tune in for next week. I think that will probably answer that one. But just going back to our example dashboard again. So back to our pivot sheet. So I'd say these are the pivots that I would have created, which pull the data from the main table, arrange it into the summaries I need. And then from these pivots, I can derive my charts. And I can also derive these text box numbers as well. And I'll go through how I've done all of that. And also the slicers. The slicers are also derived from the pivot tables. So literally every object you're seeing on that dashboard is coming from a pivot table. Okay. So how do we do it? That's going to be the next part of the session. How do we go about building that? So I'm going to open up a file which just has the data. So if you bear with me a moment, that should open up soon. So there we go. So there is now another file I've opened up. So it's a different file. But as you can see, it's only got one sheet in it, which is just the raw data that if we remember in our previous example, this is the same data that we're looking at, the course information. So I want to show you how you go about going from this to that finished dashboard. Now, in the time we have, I'm not sure we'll get it looking just as lovely as this one does, but it's mainly the mechanics of this. It's how we get those, how we get those pivots done, how we get the charts done, and so on. The cosmetic stuff, I'm not too worried about today. So yeah, don't worry if it's not too polished looking. You can obviously spend a lot of time on that yourselves. But let me run through the basics. So the first thing you're going to do in relation to creating your dashboard, we go back to our kind of list of steps here, would be to create, so obviously prepare your source data, make sure your data is good, and then start to create your pivot tables. So we are at a bit of an advantage because we know exactly what we want to create. We're going to try and recreate this dashboard in our example file. So I kind of know what I'm after here. So I'm going to create, for example, a pivot for this visual, which is the number of courses by location. So to create my pivot table, I'm going to click in my raw data and I'm going to insert pivot table. and it's going to put this new pivot table on a new worksheet. So I will hit OK, get a new sheet, and I'll probably be as well to name that as my pivots sheet. And my first pivot is going to be location and number of courses. That's the two elements I want this to show. So I'm going to pull my location from my field list down to the row area. So that gives me all my locations. And I'm going to pull the location into the values because I just want a count of those. So that will give me a total number of how many courses happened in each location and my grand total as well. So very simple. First pivot done. The first sort of summary of the data I'm looking for is done. And then I will just continue in that vein. I will start to create the next pivot tables that I'm going to need. So again, if I go back to my finished example, it'll be things like my revenue by quarter, my certified versus uncertified training, and so on. And I'm going to give you a little tip. If you want to create multiple pivot tables, hi, Anne, I just see your question. Apologies if I missed, but is there notes? Yeah, I'm going to send you on the PowerPoint presentation behind the session today. And I am going to also send you a little Word document, which gives you a bit more detail on how this all works. So yes, there will be some notes for you. Just back to the pivot I've done. So I've done one pivot. I want to do another pivot now to show a different aspect of the data. Maybe we'll do the sales by year and quarter, or the revenue by year and quarter. So I don't have to go back and start a brand new pivot table. You can actually take your first pivot, you can select it all, copy it, and just paste it somewhere on the same sheet. So I now have a second pivot table, but this one I can now modify to suit my next requirement, which, like we say, maybe will be our sales by revenue. So for my revenue by time, essentially. So to show that, I'm going to take location away, and I'm going to put in the start date into the rows instead. And I don't want count of location for this. For this one, I want the total course fees. So basically all the income we brought in, I want to see a total of those. I'll just take these out. I just want years and quarters. So now in my little pivot here, I have a nice visual, or I will have a nice visual that I'll be able to create from this that was showing me my revenue over those time periods. Okay. So again, the copy paste trick for the pivot tables is great there because it just means you just create an initial pivot table and then you just create new pivot tables out of that one. I'll show you again how I did it. Just highlight the whole pivot table, copy it, paste it. And then, as I say, you just modify that next pivot for the next summary of data that you're looking for. So this part of the process, you just have to sit down and, okay, I suppose before all of this, you'll have decided, well, I kind of know what I want my dashboard to look like. I know the kind of visuals I'm looking for. That will then tell you the pivots you'll need to create. And that's that stage that we're at now. We're just at this kind of staging part of the process for our pivot, for our dashboard. Just looking at the questions again. Yeah, nothing creeping in there. Now, just to speed the process up for us today, because I don't want to get bogged down in creating loads of pivots, I have another file, one I prepared earlier, which has the pivots already done. And I'll just open that one. Tricia, can you show inserting a new pivot again, please? Absolutely, no problem. So let me minimize that one for a moment and let me just go back to the first file again. So Patricia was just asking, could I show how to create the pivot table again? No problem at all. Yeah, so if you have your raw data, Patricia, and you're looking to create, say, that first pivot we did, which was, let's say, courses by location, I'll click into the data, I'll go to insert, and then I'll click pivot table. So it's the insert tab. Pivot table is the very first button usually on that. New worksheet will be the default option for your pivot table, so I'll just accept that. And there is my new worksheet. There is my pivot table. And then when you're creating your pivot table, you just got to decide what aspect of your data are you trying to analyze. So in our case here, we wanted to see our location, our courses by location. So for that one, I've put location to the rows and location into values. So it essentially puts every location in my data into a row in my pivot table and then is counting me the locations for those. So that gives me my overall total. I hope that's okay, Tricia. Yeah, I know some people, if you're not really awfully familiar with pivot tables, don't worry too much about it. That's, I suppose, obviously they are important for this aspect of the training or for the dashboard, but as you've seen there, they're quite simple to do. So for the, if you want to, I'm actually going to send you on this file that I've used in the session today. So you can, if you do want to get a bit of practice with them, you can maybe try them out in the example I'm going to send you. So if you're kind of new to them and you'd like to get your teeth into them, that might be helpful for you. So Patricia, I hope that's okay. Circa, I will come back to your question maybe in a little while. How do you get the data into a table format? I will come back to that one maybe. I just want to move on a little more, just so as I say, just if there's too many questions coming, I just won't get through the whole thing. But let me just put a pin in your question for the moment. But keep the questions coming, guys. And if I don't get to it, I will address it, as I say, post session. Right, just going back to the other file here, Dashboard Practice 2 that I've opened. I've just done all the pivot tables in this one, and I've just basically, it's just to speed the process up for me during the hour that we have. So I have my pivot tables. How many pivot tables do I have here? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And they, if you want to look back at the original one, they kind of correlate to the visuals I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I've got my 3 text boxes. So there's 7 visuals there, which I said track back to the number of pivot tables that I have. The next thing is, how do we create the visuals? So fine, we've done the pivots, we get those nice summaries. But the whole thing of the point of this is to get the visuals. So that's what we're going to move on to next. So let me just minimize this. So let's go back. So we're back at our pivots sheet here. So remember, just keep remembering, these pivots are pulling from this data. If this data changes, or if we add new data into it, the pivots can be refreshed, and all the charts and so on will refresh as well. So that's the beauty of all of this. It will all talk to the data will talk to those visuals once they've been created, and everything will stay up to date. And I'll show you how to do the refresh at just a later time. But anyway, let's get cracking on with the visuals. So the first chart I'm going to create would be this one, the number of courses by location. So I have the pivot done. To get the chart in place, I'm going to click into the pivot table, this one here, and then we're going to go up to the pivot table analyze tab. So this tab here gives you lots of options for your pivot table, one of which is pivot chart. So if you hover over that, you'll see it says insert a pivot chart tied to the data in this pivot table. So I'm going to click on it. Pivot charts, you'll see you get a few different options here: column, line, pie, the usual suspects. I'm going to go for just a column chart for this one. I'm going to hit OK. And that is my chart now done, which is essentially connected back to its parent pivot table, which is this pivot here. Okay. Now, this is the way I tend to do this. I will start creating all my charts now, one after the other, on this sheet here. And when I create a chart, I'll just move it over here beside its mammy. So that's the pivot table, the parent, if you like, and this is the chart that we've derived out of it. The same thing now, if I come down to the next pivot table, which was our top 5 customers by revenue, that would be this chart here we're looking to create. So again, we have the pivot done, so it's just a matter now of getting the chart out of it. So again, it's the same thing we did as in this one. Click into the pivot, up to pivot table analyze, pivot chart. And for this one, we're going to go for the bar chart. And again, I'm just going to move it down beside its mammy and just keep things kind of ordered in that way. The next one is going to be our revenue over time. So that's this pivot table here. And again, it's the same thing. Click into the pivot table analyze, pivot chart. And for this one, we're going to go for the line chart. The line chart, always a great one to go for when you want to show a trend over time. And then the fourth chart type we had on our example that we're trying to recreate was this one here. It's our certified versus uncertified. So that's a little donut chart. So for this one, again, same thing again. Into the pivot, up to analyze, pivot chart. This would be a pie chart. And if you want to go for the donut, just go for the last one of the subtypes. Now, the charts don't look great at this point. You will have noticed back on the example that I've showed you, they look a lot better. They're, got data labels on them and there's no grid lines and all that kind of thing. If we have time, I'll get into those things and how to do those before we finish. But for the moment, we'll just leave them as they are. The only thing I will show you actually at this point is when you create pivot charts, these big gray buttons show up on them, and they they don't do anything for the presentation of those charts. So I'm going to turn those off because they even annoy me looking at them there. So to turn off those big gray buttons on your pivot charts, you just click on the chart and come up to Pivot Chart Analyze. And then this button here, Field Buttons, you just turn it off. So see how those gray buttons have gone now. And you just need to do that on each one. I'm just clicking each chart, Pivot Chart Analyze, and turning off the field buttons. Again, guys, I have in the little Word document I mentioned that I'm going to send you, I have that, I think in that, I've mentioned all these kind of tips in that. But so you can obviously jot your notes down today if you want, but it will be in the supporting document. So now we have 4 charts, which track to the charts that we had in our example. So those 4 charts are done. I'm going to next move on to how to do the slicers. So the slicers, if we see again, just to remind you what they do, they enable us to filter essentially the whole dashboard based on what we select in the slicer. So we can filter by tutor, we can filter by course, whatever we wish. So it adds a really nice layer of interactivity to your dashboard. So how do we do those? So I'm going to show you that now, and we're going to do this. First of all, we're going to click into the first pivot table on the worksheet. So I'm going back to kind of the first pivot I did. And then I'm going back again to the same tab where we found the chart option. So Pivot Table Analyze. That's the chart. Over to the left, about a quarter of the way over, or maybe a third of the way over, you'll see the button there called Insert Slicer. This is what we use to create those nice interactive slicers. Give it a click. This then gives you a list of all the columns that are in your data set. So remember, you got to always remember these pivots and everything here is pulling from that first big table of data that we looked at. And these are all the columns in that data. So if I want to be able to filter the dashboard by, let's say, tutor, I'll tick tutor. If I want to be able to filter by venue, by course name and level, I think they were the 4 that we had in our first example. They're the 4 I'm going to go with. And when I hit OK, the 4 slicers that I have gone for or selected appear on my worksheet. So that is how we do slicers. So simple. So I said, I'll just show you that again. We click into the first pivot table we did, Pivot Table Analyze, and then this is the Insert Slicer button here. Now, it all looks a bit messy at this stage, but we will get to the stage. The next phase, once we get all our visuals created, will be designing it and laying it out. But what I would tend to do is I kind of think of this as like the staging area for your dashboard. You're getting all the bits in place and then you'll move them out into their own sheet once you're happy with all of this. And there is one thing we need to just look at with the slicers, because there is going to be a little bit of an issue probably with them, which is if I click on a course, for example, in my course name slicer, are you noticing that the only chart and pivot that seem to be changing is the first one? Do you see how these other 3 here don't seem to be budging? Hopefully you can see that. Or if I go for any of these options, it's only the first one that seems to be changing. Right, so that's something we need to address, because obviously in our dashboard, when we click on a course, we want all of the visuals to update. And it's very simple. To get the slicers to talk to all the other pivots on the sheet, you need to right click on the slicer. And we do this on each slicer. So we right click and we click on Report Connections. And you'll see there is why it's not working only on the first one. We need to tick all the other pivots on the worksheet. So essentially, you're telling this slicer to connect to all the pivots. Initially, it will only connect to the first one. And once this is done, it will work then for you perfectly from then on out. I just need to do the same thing on the other slicers. So let me do that now. Right click, Report Connections. I'll just make that a little bigger and I'll just tick all the pivots. So now my slicers are going to be able to talk to all those pivot tables. So right click, Report Connections, and tick. And I know this is a bit of a pain to have to do it, but you only have to do it once. So now if I click on the course or click on anything, I will be able to see And if you keep an eye on the graphs as I'm clicking around, you can see they're all updating, they're all changing. So I hope that's making a little bit of sense to you. So there's this, you know, I suppose you kind of have to think of it as stages. So we're at the designing stage. We're at the stage where we're just creating all the components for our dashboard. But as you see, the pivot tables are the backbone of all of that. So your step 1 is get all the pivots done. Step 2, get all your charts done. Step 3, get your slicers done. And make sure your slicers then talk to those pivot tables. I'm just going to call out something quickly here. And again, this will kind of allude to maybe next week's session in a way. Your dashboard is only going to be as good as the data that's feeding it. And that goes for anything in Excel. If you've got really not great data, you're not going to be able to get good answers out of it. And I just see something in the course names here that's a perfect example of this. Do you see in the courses here, we have access and then we have access spelled a different way. And we have Excel and we've Excel spelled a different way. You know, these are the kinds of things that in your data can cause you problems. And that's what next week's session kind of focuses around. It's like, how do we work with bad data? Is there ways we can use, or are there things we can do in Excel to mitigate those bad data, I suppose, or that bad data creeping into our files and eventually into our dashboards? To get this fixed for now, I remember everything comes back to the raw data. So the problem here is we've got a couple of courses in here that are just spelled incorrectly. These ones here. Now, if I change them and make them correct again, just clear my filter again. So they are now fixed, I think. Yeah, so there's no additional Access or Excel now showing up in the list. And if I go into my pivots here, again, the whole beauty of this is if I change something back in the main data table in your pivot sheet, if I go to data and if I just hit refresh all, keep an eye on my slicer as I hit refresh all. You'll notice I now just have Excel and Access. Now these are ghosting here. I'm just going to turn those off. We'll maybe address that again. If anyone has a question on that, you can send it through to me if you've seen that happen before and you want to know how I got rid of those. But yeah, I now have my slicer back and it's showing me just the courses that I need. But it's just to the point of your dashboard can only be as good as the data that feeds it. So your data is so important. So important that it's good data, that it's correct. And like I say, next week's session is going to hone in a lot more on that side of things. What if your data isn't good? What can we do to help ourselves? Right, back to our dashboard. So we now have our charts, we have our slicers. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start moving those components now, those visuals, out onto their own worksheet. So I'm just going to add a new sheet, and I'm as well to probably name that sheet now as dashboard. And then I'm going to shoot back here to the pivots sheet. And now I'm going to use my control key just to select all these bits and pieces. Just be careful when you're doing this. When you have control pressed, if you accidentally drag the mouse, sometimes it copies all the visuals on you. So just be very careful as you click around. Now I've got them all selected. So I'm just going to go control and actually I'm going to cut them. I don't want to copy them. I don't want to leave them here. I want to move them. So I'm going to go Control X to cut them. And then on my new clean dashboard sheet, I'm going to Control V to paste them. So we're getting somewhere now. You can see now we have raw data. There are the pivots then that create the summaries. We've created our visuals out of those summaries, and now those visuals have been moved onto their own sheet. So now we can start to look at the presentation. So we have a lot of the mechanics done now. I just see a question coming in. When we are sending on the notes, could it be possible to get a copy of the raw data spreadsheet so that we can practice? Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you on the finished example that we looked at that we're trying to create, and I will send you on an example with just the raw data. Absolutely, so you can have a try of it. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to just roughly lay out the dashboard, kind of like it was in our example. So I think if I recall correctly, we had the slicers kind of up along the top. Now, again, our finished one, it might not look exactly like the one we showed you at the outset, but that's really going to be just down to cosmetics. I'm not too worried about those. So I'm just going to put a rough shape on it in terms of the layout. So there's my slicers up along. Yeah, usually with slicers, you actually put them along the top or maybe down the left-hand side of your dashboard so that they're kind of easy to get at, and then you have your visuals laid out below or to the right. I think we had the training by location as our main graph on the bottom left. Do you remember in our example? And I think next to that, then it had the little chart to show certified or uncertified. Then we had the top 5 customers. And then we had our revenue over time kind of above that. So just trying to mock up something like what we had in our example. Actually, I have a bit more room to play with here, so I might just make these a little bit bigger. But you get the idea. This is where, I suppose, this is where the time goes by very, very quickly. You can end up spending quite a lot of time just lining things up and so on. Again, the document I'm going to send you has some tips around that. So just to kind of help you get through the pain of trying to lay things out accurately. There are some little tips you'll see in that document to help you with all of that. But yeah, it's kind of starting to take a bit of a shape now. And again, remember, your slicers are all interactive now. So if I click on a course and so on, you can see all your charts updating. So we're kind of getting places. Just a word on the slicers. Slicers, they really can be a really important part of your dashboard because they give that bit of interactivity. They're a little bit awkward to lay out though. So what I find really helpful is when you create a slicer, the buttons in the slicer will go in one vertical line. As you can see, like when we have a good few courses, you get quite a lot of buttons. So you can imagine if you have 20 or 30 items, you've got a very long slicer and it's hard to navigate it. So what I find is really good is if we have a slicer which has a lot of items in it, we can click on the slicer, we can go to the slicer tab, and this setting here for columns, if we increase that to 2 or 3, do you see what it's doing? It's giving the slicer more columns to lay those buttons out across. So you can make much better use of the space that you have available if you change that setting. But the default, it'll just give you 1 column of buttons in every slicer. So I'll just show you that again. So when I click on the slicer there, that's what it was at the beginning. All the buttons laid out, one kind of on top of the other. But if you increase the slicer in the slicer tab, increase the columns to maybe 3, it just looks so much neater. And we can fit more slicers in place there as well if we can adjust that setting. Right, the next thing I want to show you how to do is the text boxes. If I just again jump back to our initial example, we had these nice little boxes here. These are really good just to show those high level numbers. So this one here showing us the overall number of courses, this one here showing our total revenue, and this one here showing the costs. And they are simply just text boxes. Now, where they get their numbers from is on the pivots sheet. So if we go back here again. So if you recall, all we've done at this point is shown how to create the 4 charts. I do have 3 other pivots though, which are what will drive the numbers in the text boxes. And these pivots are really simple pivots. If I click on this one here, for example, you'll see if you just want a pivot table to just show you an overall total of something, you just use the values area. So I've just dragged the ID of the course down there and it's just given me a count of that ID to tell me how many courses we had. This little pivot here just has the sum of course fee. So it just means that I have course fee in values. And then the other one here is the costs. So that just has the costs column. So that's how we're going to get the numbers for those text boxes. We've created simple pivots that pull out those numbers. Now, one other thing you need to do if you're going to do these text boxes, if I go over here now to my dashboard, I'm going to create these text boxes. So insert, or you can actually just do it through shapes. So if you go to insert, shapes, and then you click on whatever shape you like. So I might go with this rounded rectangle. So this is what I'm talking about. This little shape that I've drawn can display the number that we have created in the pivot table on the other sheet. The only thing about them though is you can't connect directly to that number from the shape that we've created. Okay, it's just something we can't do. So you'll notice what I have here is you can see the same numbers down here. And what I've done is I've created just a little reference to this cell here. And then I'll use this one to link to the text box. And I'll just do the same thing for the course fee and costs because we're going to need to do the same there. So I'm going to just say equals this cell, enter. And it just means I now have a cell that I can reference for my text box because to repeat, I can't reference the cell directly in the pivot table. It just won't work. So if I go, same here, equals this. So again, I'm just hitting equals, I'm clicking the cell, and I'm hitting enter. So now I have these numbers here that I'll be able to feed into my text box. Again, you can format these numbers if you want to put the currency format on them. All that kind of stuff can be done as well. So how do we get those numbers into the text boxes? Well, let's start with this one. So let's say this one, we want to show the number of courses. So to do that, you just click on the shape that you've drawn, then click into the formula bar, type an equal sign, and browse over to where that number is that you want to connect to. This is the cell here we were saying we want to connect that text box to, and then I just hit enter. So essentially it kind of creates a little formula for the shape to know which cell you'd like it to pull from. Now you probably find it hard to see that on your screens there, but the 111 is there. I might just make the font a bit lighter, and I'll make the text a bit bigger so that you can see it. So there's my number of courses. And then it's the same process for the costs. If I want to show, if you remember on the other dashboard we had our revenue and our costs showing up. It's the exact same process for that. I'll just run through that process again. I'll just copy my first text box, and I'll change this formula for this one. So again, it's highlight the text box, into the formula bar, equals this sheet, this cell, enter. And there I have my revenue, actually, sorry, is what I've linked to there, not the costs. But it would be the same thing again then. I want to link to this cost figure. Get your shape on the sheet, click it, and do that little linking formula, which will bring across the number. And again, because they are pivot tables, because these numbers here are driven by pivot tables, your slicers will work on them. So if you click on a course, do you see how those numbers change according to your selection? So everything works really nicely together because they're all pivot table derived. Okay, so we might just do the third one, just so you get another look at the process. So again, if I wanted to do that, so that's my total number of courses, that's my income, and then if I want to do my costs, again, I'm just duplicating another text box, and then I'm just changing the formula on this new one to point now to this cell. So yeah, there's a little bit of work in setting those up. But again, once you have them set up, they sort of self-service then, because they're pulling their information from the pivot table. Yeah, so you're going to have to spend a bit of time on the whole layout of the visuals and so on. And like I say, I don't really want to get into doing much on that today because we'll just waste time. But you get the idea. You'll have to align things and get things all sort of, I suppose, prettied up to some degree to make things look right. Again, I'll do a few tips on that maybe for the last couple of minutes if I have time. But I think at this point, if we just go back to our original dashboard, I think we actually have nearly every element in there. Bar, I'll show you here, there's a couple of little icons and a little heading I've created obviously for those text boxes. So if you just want to show you how to do that. The headings are just shapes again. So if you want to put in, a title on the text box, you can just put in a little shape and draw it over that text box and type in the title for it, and then adjust your formatting and so on to suit. So I can put my courses, I can put my revenue heading on this, and my costs heading on the third one. You get the drill. And again, if you don't want any background or shading on those, just clear the fill color on them. So you can kind of use your imagination to create some nice looking visuals. And again, that example I'm going to send you, all that I would have done in this one is these are 3 text boxes that I've shaded white. Then I've drawn a big rectangle around those and shaded that with blue. And that's actually a nice little technique there, because they look like they're kind of part of one area of the dashboard. Instead of being 3 individual boxes, they kind of form one zone, if you like. So that's just a large shape in the background with 3 shapes in front, which are connected to the pivot values. Right, back to here, and the next thing we're going to start to look at. So now I think, yeah, we have the visuals in place. So we have the charts, we have the text boxes, we have the slicers. The refresh button I'll leave for the minute, but I'll try and squeeze that in before we finish up. The next thing we're going to talk about is just presenting it. So it still doesn't look terribly great. And as I said, obviously a bit of layout has to be done and so on. But there's some really simple things you can do to make your dashboard look like a dashboard. Because at the minute, it just looks like a few things thrown onto an Excel sheet. So watch here, in 2 minutes, we're going to make this look so much better. So the first thing I will tend to do is, in the background, and you can use your column widths and all that to kind of adjust where exactly you want things to sit on the page. And then once you get things kind of lined up where you want them, you can then highlight, and this is what I would always do, highlight a background, the background zone, if you like, of where all your visuals sit. Annette, yeah, I'll come to your question in a moment. Yes, so what we can do is in the background, we can highlight the area behind the visuals. And what I tend to do with that then is I fill color of some kind of a light color in the background so that it has a nice light canvas that it sits on. And then I'd sometimes take the top section and I'd maybe shade that one in a bit darker. And then I might put my dashboard title up here. And again, I'm just typing this straight into a cell. So we'll just call it, say, training analysis. And again, you can format that text in any way that you usually would. Also, stick a border around it. So like an outside border is always a good idea. And maybe a border on the bottom of this one as well. So this is the idea. You can kind of, again, use your own creativity and ideas on how you want to lay this out. But you see, even that alone makes the whole thing look much more cohesive and more look like a dashboard. So that's simply shading, color shading in the background. And that technique of a little darker border at the top just gives it that bit of definition. Your slicers and the color theme on those, again, you can adjust that to suit your preference. So for example, sorry, just adjust that down a little. So yeah, slicers, if you want to kind of mix your slicer color theme in a little better with what you have in the data, you can go into the slicer tab and you'll see different color schemes there that you can apply. So you can go with any of those. So it's again, just giving you an idea there that there's lots of flexibility in terms of color schemes and how you might want to lay things out. Just on color, I would keep your color scheme to 2 main colors and then maybe 1 accent color. So like in our example dashboard, you can see it's blue, white, and orange. So we kind of use the orange just to accent things. Blue is kind of the main color, or white, I suppose, is the main color as such. Blue then is our kind of secondary color, and then the accent color, I suppose, is the orange. So I would go no more than 3 colors and use the sort of brighter color quite sparingly if you can. Just the less color, I think, the more professional it looks. Says she after putting pink on hers, but anyway, you get the idea. Annette, sorry, you just had a question there. Can the dashboard be easily copied into a PowerPoint slide with a connection to the Excel file so it refreshes in the slide? Yes, you can. I think I have time. I can briefly show you this. Yeah, you can actually highlight that range of cells. Then in PowerPoint, I'm just going to insert a blank slide here into our presentation. And then when you go to, so you've copied your Excel there, you've copied that range. When you come into Excel, or sorry, into PowerPoint, and maybe I'll just shift these out so you can see this a bit more clearly. When you come into PowerPoint, you can hit a normal paste, and that will just dump the contents in as it looked, if you like, in the Excel file. But there's no connection back to the raw data. You might have to make it a bit smaller and so on. But if you want to link it, go to your paste button in PowerPoint, go to the drop-down menu and go to paste special. And that will give you the option to paste link. And that means it'll paste in that dashboard and it will kind of connect back to, or it'll kind of paste a picture, if you like, of the dashboard, which would be connected back to the Excel file. So that's kind of how it comes into your PowerPoint. So I hope that might maybe give you some ideas, Annette, on that, how that might work. So it's in PowerPoint, you've copied it in Excel, you're going to your lower button on your paste button in PowerPoint, into paste special, and then you're going to paste link. That's the key there. Excuse me. Right, so I'm back to my dashboard again. What else do we want to do? Yeah, so kind of formatting, I guess, and presentation. So the charts themselves, as I said to you, they don't look great. I suppose the default options I find in Excel charts just aren't that attractive, especially for dashboards. So just let me show you 3 or 4 simple clicks you can do in a chart to make it look more, and refresh me. Yeah, I will. To look a little bit more refined. So first of all, I would always tend to turn off the grid lines. So in your chart, when you click on your chart, when you go to the green plus sign in the corner, you can turn off the grid lines there and turn off any unnecessary legend. So the legend is this here. I don't need that. I know these are totals. So I turn that off as well. The idea is you're given the data, the chart, as much space as you can to show its values rather than cramming it up with grid lines and unwanted items. Another thing I would tend to do is turn on the data labels. That means that the bars then will get their representative value placed on top of them. Much easier for somebody to digest the numbers. And in addition to that, I don't now need the axis titles, which are these numbers here. So to turn those off, I go into axes and turn off the vertical, primary vertical. So straight away, it looks so much cleaner and easier to digest. So just simple things like that. And you can do that on each chart you may have in your dashboard. Okay, so into the green plus sign. So grid lines, turn off the grid lines, turn on the data labels, turn off your vertical axis, and turn off your legend. Well, legend may be needed sometimes if it's genuinely you've got a couple of things you're showing, but if it's like in these ones here, they're only showing a total. I don't need to see the legend for that. So yeah, they just take up a lot of room. So I would tend to turn those off. So again, just simple things you can do. One final thing to show you, well, almost final, in terms of layout and the look and feel of your sheet, the grid lines look nasty on the dashboard because the whole idea of a dashboard, you're nearly trying to make out that you're not in Excel, that it's just some really slick dashboard. So to turn those off, I often see people going off trying to fill them up with color. But all you need to do for the grid lines is go to the View tab, and you'll see there about halfway over is your grid lines. So you just turn them off from there. And see how you get a nice clean sheet now with no grid lines. And also I would tend to turn off the headings, you know, the ABC on the top and the 1, 2, 3 down the side, the numbers, turn those off as well. That can be done in the same area. There's your grid lines, there's your headings, switch them off. So do you see how it looks so much cleaner now? So that would be, I'd always tend to do that as the very last step, because it's handy to have the headings on so that you can kind of see where you're at. But once you've everything laid out and you're happy with it, turn them off. Refresh button, these, yeah, you're asking for it there. So let me throw that into the mix. So the whole point of your dashboard is it's connecting back to this data here. Okay, this data here is in a table. Tables are dynamic, which means they can grow with your data. And again, next week we'll probably get into that whole realm a little more. But if I add, so for example, if I add a new course in here, and I'm just going to cheat and copy an old course, save me a bit of time. And I'll just maybe put this into 2020. So, not 2010, 2020. So if I've added a new course into the data here, if I come back to the dashboard, I'm still at 111, but I need to refresh the data and the pivots in order to see that new course come in here. So to do that, you have 2 options. You can go to the data tab, you can click refresh all, and you'll see there 112 now in courses, and you see how we've gone into 2020 now. So our 2020 has crept into our trending graph. But I need to know to do that in order for the data to change. So data, refresh all. Now that's fine if I know that, but if I'm a user of Excel that's fairly novice and I don't really know anything about that, and I'm using a dashboard, me as a designer, I'm better give somebody an easier way to refresh. So I can do that through the use of a macro button, which is so this is the last thing I'm going to show you. I'm going to add a little button into my dashboard so that when it's clicked, it refreshes all the pivots, picks up any new data, and I'm looking at the most recent version of things. So to do this, we're getting into a little bit of macro code, but it's very simple. It's just one little line you need to know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a shape, just like I did for the text boxes. I'm going to draw a shape onto the dashboard. And I'm going to right click on the shape. and I'm going to use this button here, or this option here, assign macro. And I'm going to click on new. And you'll see a secondary window opens up. And this is where you can tell your button what you'd like it to do. So it's essentially, it's a macro essentially that you're creating. And a macro just simply executes a command. And the command we wanted to execute is active workbook dot refresh all. Again, guys, I can send you that. I think that might even be in the Word document that I'm actually sending you on. But that little bit of code there that we've added, I'll just close this. So this secondary window that opens up, that's where you're putting in that code, active workbook dot refresh all. I close that little window, and my button now, if I come over to it, has a little hand that appears on it, which indicates that it's going to do something. And what it's going to do if I click on it is it's going to refresh. And again, you probably can't see it on my screen very clearly, but when I click the hand there, it just whirs around the little circles and it refreshes. Now, again, if you want to just see proof positive that it's working, I'm going to add another course into the mix. And again, I'll just copy an old one. So we've got a new course added into the source data. Again, it's not come into the dashboard yet, but now with my little refresh button, if I click on it, I'll see my 112 go up to 113. So that just makes it a little easier for you and maybe other users of the dashboard to make sure they're looking at the most recent data. I'd say the other way to do it is data refresh all, but like I say, you kind of have to know to do that in order for the dashboard to refresh. And if you want to put a bit of text on that button, obviously you can just right click on the button, edit text, or EF, and you can put the little clue as to what your button does onto it and just format it accordingly. So that, as a final flourish, will give your dashboard just that nice level of kind of it'll take care of itself then. You know, everybody will be able to refresh it. It'll pull from the source data if things change. Now, no open questions. I don't know if anyone has any other questions. Yeah, great. So yeah, I know a couple of questions came in kind of regarding the data and like how we had it stored in a table and all that kind of stuff. I think that's really what we're gearing session 2 more toward the core data and how best to manage that. And if you have tricky data, so if you'd really like to be able to create visuals out of data, or even just an example of where next week could come in useful for you is if you get files in regularly and you spend a lot of time rejigging those files and wrestling with the data just to get it into the structure you're looking for, Power Query could save you a huge amount of time. That's what it's for. It allows you to tidy up, shape, readjust, I suppose, data that you're sent or that you receive in a very, very quick fashion. So that could be of some interest for you next week. But yeah, I think that's probably enough for you to digest today. So I'm sure Arlene will be in touch with some of the supporting materials. If you have any post-course questions, happy to take those via email. So again, you can throw them to Arlene and she'll pass them on to me. But yeah, I hope you found it useful and a worthwhile hour. And yeah, we hope to see you on next week's session. Take care, everybody. I think you can probably sign off. Again, I don't think, Arlene, you're going to pop in, or Marion. I think you're done. All right, folks, take care. Have a lovely rest of the day. I hope to see you all again next week.